This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. If you're a mother, you've heard the phrase, breast milk is best. But what happens if you have a low supply or a premature baby to feed? Coming up, we'll learn more about human milk depots as the 5th donation facility in the state is set to open August 30th. Also, remember last summer when scores of gypsy moth caterpillars were seen feasting on trees? They've had an impact, especially in eastern Connecticut. The state forester will join us with an update just ahead. But first, at least 100 overdoses on the New Haven Green last week put a spotlight on the drug known as K2. Many of the victims were treated at hospitals and released. What is K2, and how should public health officials respond? You can join our conversation. The number 860-275-7266. You can email us, wherewelive@wnpr.org, or find us on Facebook and Twitter @wherewelive. Joining us by phone now is Dr. John Douglas, addiction psychiatrist and service chief of the Outpatient Addiction Program at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. Dr. Douglas, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
So tell us more about K2. What is it exactly, and how is it different from marijuana?
Sure. So K2 is a synthetic cannabinoid or synthetic marijuana, which basically means it's a synthetic chemical that is sprayed usually onto plant matter that people use to usually smoke. And it was initially designed to stimulate the same receptor system as marijuana. But over the years, the chemical has changed dramatically, and we're now seeing a lot more different and, unfortunately, more severe side effects.
When you heard the news that there were at least 47 people, up to 100 overdoses last week on the New Haven Green, what was your reaction?
My reaction was first, of course, how unfortunate this is, and just that initially when I heard about it, it was very surprising because overdosing on K2 is more rare. That's not a common side effect, but unfortunately in the past 2 years we have been seeing more of that in different cities around the country.
And so what causes these overdoses?
So that is a really interesting question, actually. So traditionally with the synthetic marijuana, the more severe side effects that we would see are usually people getting extremely paranoid and psychotic, and they would sometimes end up being hospitalized on psychiatric wards. Overdosing was not something we usually saw. And so the reason they're overdosing is actually unclear, and I think really speaks to the fact that we have just these new chemicals that are really untested and the effects of which are largely unknown. It also speaks to the possibility that these chemicals may have been mixed with other chemicals such as synthetic opioids like fentanyl or carfentanil.
And when we talk about synthetic, again, marijuana, again, K2 being what was described by authorities as the cause of many of the overdoses last week in New Haven, there are other street names for this drug. Can you tell us more about that, Dr. Douglas?
Sure. Actually, there's numerous street names for synthetic marijuana. Probably K2 and Spice are the best well-known, but there's all kinds of different names like Black Cloud and Cloud 9, Fake Weed, Legal Bud. They go under a variety of different names, and I think one thing that has been common about them in the past is they're usually sold as incense or potpourri or marked as products not for human consumption, all in a way to try to avoid regulation.
So right now, this is unregulated by the DEA, is that right?
Well, actually, so currently these chemicals are technically illegal. Since 2012, there was a law put in place that does make them illegal. They used to be, before 2012, they were completely unregulated, and you could buy them in convenience stores or at gas stations. But as their abuse has increased and the problems with them has increased, they are illegal, but they are still widely available.
When we talk about, again, these overdoses on the green, and we talked about how it's getting potentially stronger over the last few years, can you walk us through, how emergency responders are expected to respond when they see someone possibly dealing with overdose symptoms? I understand large amounts of Narcan were used. If you could walk us through what happens in this kind of scenario where you see mass overdoses going on around you.
Yeah, so these kinds of scenarios always really challenge any sort of emergency response team. And I think from what I read in the news, the teams that responded did a fantastic job. But usually what happens is people will see, people falling over or nodding out where they just seem unresponsive or they're becoming unconscious or staggering around. And they'll call the emergency response team and they'll show up and then they'll assess the person. If they're really losing consciousness and looks like they're having trouble with breathing or look like they're in bad shape, they'll usually give them Narcan with the assumption that they are overdosing on an opioid like heroin or prescription pain pills. In this particular case, they gave the Narcan and the people didn't really respond to it right away. I did hear later when they got to the ER, some of them, they gave them stronger doses and they did respond to that. And so when someone is not responding to Narcan, that could mean one of two things. It could mean that what they're overdosing on is not opioid-based, or they have an opioid in their system that is binding extremely strongly to their system that is not able to be easily treated by the Narcan.
I think there was concern that some of the K2 from last week's mass overdoses might have had fentanyl in it, but NPR reported, police have said some initial test results is that this K2 was laced with something called Fumanaca. Can you talk about that at all, what that chemical is?
Fumanaca. Actually, that's something that I have not really heard of, and so I can't really speak a lot to that. But if it is, it may have an opioid component to it, which would explain why people are overdosing and having similar responses to as if it was fentanyl or something else. But I think what's really important to understand is that these chemicals are changing all the time, and they're always being mixed with something new, or they're modifying the chemical in different ways in attempts to trying to avoid the regulation part of it, and also in just trying to augment the chemical and give people a more intense high. And so it is a field that is constantly changing and unfortunately very hard for treatment professionals to keep up with.
On the phone with me is Dr. John Douglas, addiction psychiatrist and service chief of the outpatient addiction program at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut, as we talk about, again, these mass overdoses that happened on the New Haven Green late last week because many of them took K2 and it caused many of them to go to the hospital. And it was something that drew people's attention because there were multiple overdoses happening around EMS and other personnel last week when they tried to respond. So, Dr. Douglas, again, when we see something like this happening, again, when we hear that K2, the way it's being manufactured, the chemical components are stronger, how should public health officials be responding?
So, public health officials, I think in an emergency situation, they responded exactly as they should have. You show up, you assess the people, you get them to the ER, you stabilize their vital signs, and then I think the next step, which unfortunately is harder, is you're trying to engage them in getting treatment for their addiction. And that is a collaborative process between the patient and the treatment system. So you're trying to work with the patient to get them motivated to want to make a change and help them recognize that the path they're on is quite destructive and very dangerous.
I understand the president's nominee for drug czar will be in New Haven later today. Governor Daniel Malloy and others will be joining him, and they'll be talking about, I guess, their hope to reverse cuts in drug abuse spending. But are there other ways to be talking about this issue beyond the funding that's available to communities, in your view?
Well, I think that one thing that came out from the overdoses that I thought was very interesting is that several of the people were overdosing multiple times. So we had over 100 different overdoses, but that included some people overdosing 3 and 4 times, according to the officials who were on the scene. And that actually is unfortunately a common scenario where when people are struggling with addiction, they really do have a loss of control, where when they get a substance that is so powerful that makes them overdose, unfortunately for many, that is not a warning sign that, oh my gosh, this is dangerous. That is a sign that, hey, I really got my money's worth out of that, and it was so strong I almost overdosed. If I go back and use it again, I'll maybe use a little less, but I can get the same high. And so there's this addicted mentality of thinking that puts people in real danger.
So as New Haven and other towns continue to discuss this problem, what are some takeaways for them on how to, address addiction within their communities?
So I think the first step for anyone, if you're concerned about a loved one or someone you just see that doesn't seem to be doing well, the first step is really to encourage them to get evaluated. The first step for anyone to get help is to get into the treatment system. And you can start at a variety of different places. You could start with a psychiatrist, you could start with a counselor, but you really just want to let someone know that you're struggling. And then from there, they'll help you get into a program and help determine what is the most appropriate level of care for you.
We were talking a lot about K2, but are there other drugs that parents should be watching out for, other drugs that you think aren't getting as much attention in terms of people abusing them?
Yeah, so I think there's a common idea in the public sometimes that you can be addicted to one substance but not another. And when you work in the profession, you really do treat addiction as a general risk. So once you're addicted to one thing, you're at risk of becoming addicted to multiple different substances. And I think one thing that really stands out to me when you have these kinds of tragedies is people tend to really focus on the substance that was causing the tragedy, and I think this happens a lot with the opioid epidemic. But I think what people are not talking about a lot is the biggest killers of people with addiction are still alcohol and cigarettes. So addiction really affects people in a lot of different ways, and the substances that are abused most commonly are still causing most of the problems.
And then in terms of when we're talking specifically about K2, and I'd mentioned advice to parents, how readily accessible are these drugs? Can they just be bought over the internet, and where are they coming from?
So these drugs are very accessible, and you mentioned the internet. And the internet is certainly a major place that a lot of people are getting K2, spice, and opioids, and a variety of different substances. You can even, on the internet now, you can have cocaine and heroin delivered to your house through the mail system. And so that's how people are ordering them a lot of the times. As far as like K2 and spice go, traditionally these are chemicals that were manufactured usually overseas, and a lot of the research points to China, but they really can be developed in any place, and I'm sure some of them are made here in the United States.
Often the attention on New Haven because of these mass overdoses, Dr. Douglas. Is this something that municipalities should be thinking about preparing for this happening again, or was this an isolated incident?
Well, it definitely has happened multiple times in different cities. So we are seeing overdoses on K2 around the country now. As far as preparing for it, the response is really you're looking to support someone's basic vital signs and basic body functions where they're able to breathe and their circulatory system is working. And so the response that you prepare for in the emergency setting, I think people are really that's a standard procedure that people are handling very well. I think the part where we could use improvement is how we approach addiction treatment and how we battle the stigma of people battling with addiction that is all too often a barrier for them to engage in our treatment system.
Meanwhile, first responders have Narcan as their to use when they encounter individuals that are possibly overdosing. Are there concerns about the supply being low across the state?
There's always I think even in this particular overdose, I think they were running low on Narcan, but as you pointed out, the people weren't really responding to Narcan in the first place, and so having Narcan available is critical. And I do think our our leaders and our emergency response teams are very aware that Narcan needs to be available. Definitely, I think it should be something standard in the training of emergency response people, of police officers. They should know how to use that, and really, it is an easy substance to use. I often give trainings for parents and people in the community so they can have it available too. And I think the more widespread we can make Narcan, that will definitely help it be more available if you see someone who may be suffering from an overdose.
Again, Dr. John Douglas is addiction psychiatrist and service chief of the outpatient addiction program at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. Dr. Douglas, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Up next, we're going to get an update on how invasive insects are impacting the state's tree canopy. Are you noticing more dead trees in your neighborhood? You can join our conversation. 860-275-7266. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Last summer, you may remember the sheer number of gypsy moth caterpillars on trees around the state. Depending on where you live, the caterpillars seem to be everywhere, on your car, your patio, all over your driveway. As the State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP, described the insect invasion on its website, they were obnoxious. Well, now the impact of this particular invasive insect is being seen, especially throughout eastern Connecticut. Are you noticing more dying trees near where you live? Join the conversation, 860-275-7266. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I want to welcome back to the show Chris Martin. He's State Forester for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the impact of the gypsy moth caterpillar. It's something that, again, residents heard a lot about last year, but they may be seeing the impact come now.
Yes, we've had 2 to 3 years, consecutive years of dry springs, and that allowed the caterpillar population to explode. The consecutive years of defoliation, coupled with the drought, has met the demise of many trees in eastern Connecticut.
So when we're talking about trees, specifically oak trees or all kinds of trees?
Mostly oak. The hardest hit species has been white oak. That is a preferred food source for the gypsy moth caterpillar. But there's a variety of oaks that were impacted heavily, and other non-target species of trees also. But the consecutive years of defoliation, the trees have not been able to recover. And we're seeing a lot of gray ghosts out in the green forest these days, and it's because those trees are dead.
You mentioned a dry spring, so walk us through how that impacts or allows the gypsy moth caterpillar to, cause so much destruction.
Well, there's a naturally occurring fungus in the soil, a mega fungus, and brought over to the United States and Japan. It laid latent for 80 so years, and then in 1989. We had a very wet spring and a gypsy moth outbreak, and we saw massive die-offs of the gypsy moth. The same thing occurred in 2017. The wetness of the spring came late May, early June. Caterpillars had already done their damage, but we did see a massive die-off, not only in Connecticut, but Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Unfortunately, some of the gypsy moth had already gone into the moth stage, and therefore we had some remnant populations this year.
And so I was thinking about the weather lately. It's been kind of rainy, but it was drier much earlier, a couple months ago.
Yeah, the rain came a little late this year in May, but it was effective for the most part. And the population really had crashed the year before, so there wasn't that much defoliation occurring this year.
And the gypsy moth has been around for a long time in the state?
Yeah, first discovered in the early 1900s. Was actually brought into Massachusetts as part of an experiment for silkworm industry, and unfortunately got loose and made its way into Connecticut, and has actually expanded, eastward through Pennsylvania into Missouri. Yeah.
So we started the conversation talking about the trees on the eastern side of the state. A lot of them that are dying. So what happens then?
Well. Lots of things. I mean, there's lots of options for homeowners or woodland owners to consider. One is to let it be. A dead tree is not necessarily a bad thing. It's good for habitat, wildlife. But if that dead tree poses a risk, if it falls down or starts to fall apart, the branches, then you really want to pay attention and make a plan. It's a good time of year to make a plan right now because prior to leaf fall, it's very evident if the tree is alive or dead. And trees that have not re-leafed, which they will do earlier in the summer, they have not re-leafed, they are not going to. So now's the time to consider what your course of action is going to be.
Mm-hmm. From the state perspective, how much of these trees is a responsibility of the state to remove?
Well, certainly our DOT is working hard on state roads as well as town crews, removing trees close to the road that pose a risk. And we're working in concert with DOT, helping them store some of the material temporarily. We like to see the larger boles of the trees that are removed reused and made into a usable product to store up that carbon long term, like furniture, flooring, cabinetry. So we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons. But a lot is going to be, chipped and maybe used for home heating fuel, for heating sources.
Chris Martin is in studio with us here in Where We Live, State Forester for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, as we talk about the long-term impact of the gypsy moth caterpillars that have devastated a lot of the canopy around the state. Specifically in eastern Connecticut, they're seeing a lot of dying oaks. And if you're seeing that where you live, we want to hear from you, 860-275-7266. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. You mentioned that residents can see if a tree is dying at this time of year specifically. That can be costly, though, depending on how many trees they have around. Are there any ways to help residents, or is this something that they have to foot the bill?
Unfortunately, they're on the hook. The property owners, if those trees need to come down, their best course of action, of course, is to get several quotes from reputable tree removal companies. Make sure they have insurance, the company, and then if you're going to enter into a contract, have it be a written estimate, itemized bill, and then check those references. But unfortunately, there's going to be some heavy costs to property owners that have to have those trees removed.
Mm-hmm. Is this something that's been, I guess, allocated in your budget and DOT's budget to deal with? As we hear about the budget crunch over the last several years, how much of a pain has this become?
It's a fairly large inconvenience. We haven't received any special allocations for the dead tree removals. Our parks crews are working every day, removing hazardous trees in our state parks. And in our state forests, we're trying to salvage those trees and sell them to a usable product prior to them being too far gone. A real dead tree that starts to deteriorate cannot be sold for lumber, per se. So we're trying to minimize the impact by addressing it aggressively.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that sometimes leaving a dead tree as is can help certain habitats. But what about the fact that when you have a lot of these trees dying, how does that impact a certain species adversely?
Well, so one of the things that we're concerned about, certainly in the woodland areas where we have a lot of dead trees, is it'll give an advantage to invasive species, bittersweet, and a variety of other Japanese silt grass. So that filtered sunlight that comes in, that increased sunlight without an aggressive approach where you can have a flush of new regeneration that outcompetes the deer, will hope. And we're concerned that we're going to have more invasive species problems.
You'd also mentioned that there was this fungus that's naturally occurring that can help, but it depends upon the weather conditions. What are some other ways to tackle the gypsy moth so that this doesn't happen again in future years?
Well, we've lived with gypsy moth for almost 100 years now, and people do a variety of things. They put burlap around the bowls, they scrape off egg masses, and those are all good efforts. But some folks get disappointed that they don't see the results they anticipated because the gypsy moth caterpillar will lay eggs right up to the tippy top of the tree. And we're not recommending people climb up their trees to scrape off egg masses. There is some treatments from arborists, licensed arborists, that can treat specific trees, and you can spray. But as far as widespread programs, it's not much we can do.
You mentioned spraying, aerial spraying. Is that something that's an option, and is that a hard sell in certain communities?
It is a hard sell. There was an effort in southeastern Connecticut to look into that. And because the mosaic of land ownership is so small, you could have several landowners wanting to do aerial spraying. But then if you have one that doesn't, with the required setbacks for the spraying, it really makes it impractical.
You can join our conversation, 860-275-7266. Bob is calling from Stafford. Bob, go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I'm just wondering about next year, and all through my neighborhood, there's egg masses everywhere. And I understand there is kind of an oil that could be spread on the egg masses to essentially suffocate them. And I'm wondering if you have any information on that.
There is a dormant oil that you can spray. It's kind of a waxy substance. I would suggest contacting a licensed arborist for the effectiveness of that. Also, take a close look at the egg masses. There are some remnant egg masses from previous years. They're going to be a darker, discolored camel coat color. The newer ones are going to be brighter and lighter colored.
We were talking about, again, these trees specifically on eastern Connecticut that are dying. When we look long term, when we look at our forested lands, what's one of the, something that people sell about Connecticut is the way that our state looks and the sheer quantity of trees. People like having them around. But if you're not able to tackle this problem, what do you see long term as the state forester? Is this just something like an ebb and flow, or should we be concerned?
I'm optimistic. Connecticut's forests are some of the most diverse in the country. We're kind of in the transition zone from Appalachian hardwoods to northern hardwoods, and so our trees, our forests are incredibly resilient. We've seen disturbances like this before, and we still have many, many trees. In fact, our growth rate to removal ratio is 5-to-1. So we are growing 5 more times trees than we are removing on an annual basis. So that's actually aging our forest. In fact, we don't have enough young forest in the state, and this will help perpetuate young forest, these patches of dead trees.
When we look at oaks throughout our state, is this something, do you see that we may not see oaks in the near future because of the gypsy moth, or just like you said, we're just replanting and trying to replenish?
Yeah, so the species distribution in Connecticut is shifting away from oak, kind of naturally over time. We have to think back in Connecticut's landscape to the late 1800s and before that, where much of Connecticut was deforested, either through agriculture or charcoal making. And that wholesale cutting of all trees really promoted a lot of oak regeneration. Oak's a sun-loving tree. So over time, those oaks have grown. Some have been harvested. Some have just died for natural reasons. And we see more and more red maple and black birch taking over the forest. So I do think we'll always have a component of oak, but it's going to be, over time, it'll be reduced.
With residents who are able to take down dying trees near where they live, are there specific trees that you would recommend that they plant?
Well, we've been on a big campaign, Right Tree, Right Place. And so you want to try to picture that tree that you plant in its full maturity. And it may not be the same species that you remove. If it's near buildings or wires, you don't want to plant a tree that's going to grow 50 to 60 feet tall. And you may want something that's going to give more flowers or a fruit. So I think there's a lot to consider when you replant a tree. Exactly, thinking long term, what will that tree develop into?
We've been focusing on what we're seeing in eastern Connecticut, but this is something that is also seen in Rhode Island as well. How do you work with other states to deal with this problem?
So we do work very closely with the Department of Environmental Protections, both the equivalents in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and the foresters, the field foresters, and folks at the director level are in constant contact and comparing notes. We're often helping each other out with technical information and sharing that among state agencies. So, what we want to have is a consistent message. We are relatively small geographically, southern New England certainly, and being able to, commiserate, but also get good advice from our colleagues is very beneficial.
We focused a lot on the gypsy moth population, but we know there are other invasives that are in our state, including the emerald ash borer. Could you talk a little bit more about that and concerns with dealing with the impact of that insect?
Yes, emerald ash borer, another gift from Asia to our forests. But that is taking its toll, certainly in western Connecticut now, where there are many ash trees that have already died from the infestation, which dates back several years now, and was probably in the state 3 to 5 years before we even saw it. It's a very small insect. And it does take a few years for the trees to actually succumb to the outbreak. Now, that is marching eastward, and we are anticipating what we're seeing in western Connecticut as far as ash mortality to mimic itself in eastern Connecticut in the next few years.
So when you're thinking about ways to deal with this and other invasives, where does the money come from? Do you rely on federal support? Is there enough?
So we always would like more, but our USDA Forest Service partners and work with the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station and the DEEP for core funding allocated annually. And that's based upon performance on what we do with that money from previous years. We report a lot of information back to the USDA Forest Service. So that's probably the most critical component of financing. We've also get good support in-state for staff from general allocated funds to address these issues and provide the information that the public's looking for. We depend more and more on our website and technical bulletins to get the information out to folks than ever.
We talked about defoliation specifically in eastern Connecticut. Any concern that this will increase the risk of more fires with drought?
Well, I think there might be a slight increase. Connecticut doesn't burn a lot compared to other states, thankfully. I would disagree with the fact that we have an asbestos forest, which some people refer to it as. When we do have fires, if there's a lot of large woody debris on the ground, they can become more problematic to put out. They are longer lasting. They take a lot more effort.
And earlier you had mentioned some tips for residents, again, if they have these dying oaks on their property. How do you know that the person you're hiring isn't, insured? What questions should you be asking? Again, because it is costly to take these trees down.
Sure. So reputable contractor, and they should have proof of insurance. They should readily give you references, 3 references preferably, and call those references. Never pay in advance. That's just definitely a no-no. And get that written estimate. And I think most importantly, communication. What are the expectations of the contractor and the property owner? What is the place going to look like when they get done? Is the property owner going to put some sweat equity into the project? Are they going to keep some of the wood, stack the brush themselves, or do they want everything cleaned up like the tree never existed, including stump grinding? Mm-hmm. Also, you want to take measures to protect your property during the removal process. Yard trees are often, surrounded with infrastructure, whether it be driveway, paved stones, or underground utilities, and these are all things to consider and also impact the cost of the removal. Mm.
Have you been hearing from residents? Are they calling DEEP with questions or concerns?
We do. We get, although the number of calls have been reduced recently, but during the height of the infestation, in fact, we did a social media experiment when all those caterpillars died off, and we asked folks to report where they saw those caterpillars dying, and it created quite a bit of frenzy on our Facebook page. Actually, we were overwhelmed with comments, but it was a very useful experiment. We were able to create a map and show how that mimega fungus was working through the state. I think the residents are fairly well informed on the impacts of the gypsy moth, though.
And we have one more call before we head to break. Eric's calling from Lebanon. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. You had a caller who dialed in about methods to get rid of gypsy moth eggs. And a UConn professor that consults with the state of Connecticut recommended canola oil as a method of getting rid of, killing the egg masses. And also, I was wondering if the state would ever do some kind of citizen science thing where they'd educate homeowners or whatever to go around and kill the lower egg masses on the trees. Good
questions, Eric from Lebanon. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so that's a great effort to remove those egg masses. I recall it actually. I was in Boy Scouts. We used to get an award for who collected the most egg masses in the coffee cans type thing. But it's if the tree is isolated and stands alone by itself, that method can be successful. But oftentimes our trees are connected canopy to canopy, and the egg mass removal effort, although it can be great, oftentimes does not get the results that are desired.
And as far as the citizen science project, this is something that maybe could be seen further down the line, or?
Oh, certainly, yeah. If there's volunteer groups that want to get together and do that, looking closely at trees has other benefits. You may find something else. There's another critter lurking nearby, the Asian longhorn beetle, that we definitely don't want to see in this state, please. But it's the folks that are on the ground. It's usually not the professionals that report these things on the onset. So the more eyes on the trees, the better. And if it's engaged in an effort to remove egg masses, then that's fantastic.
I want to thank Chris Martin again, State Forester for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Up next, human milk depots are increasing in the state. Why the need? We're going to tell you more after the break, and you can join us too. 860-275-7266. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Is the Catholic Church facing a historic crisis? On the next Where We Live, we discuss systemic abuse within the church after the latest news out of Pennsylvania, where a grand jury report found more than 1,000 children were abused by Roman Catholic priests over the past 70 years. Are you a practicing Catholic? How has this crisis affected your relationship with your faith? You can join our conversation. That's tomorrow. Now, if you're a parent, you've most likely heard the phrase, breast milk is best, but what happens if your supply is low or you have a premature baby to feed? Later this month, a human milk depot will open in the greater Hartford area. It will be the 5th donation facility in the state. Now, what is a milk depot? For more on that, joining us by phone is Marissa Merlot, lactation consultant for UConn Health's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So I mentioned this is the 5th donation facility. So tell us about the need for it.
I personally see the need for it, actually. My background is nursing, and I worked here in the NICU at UConn Health. And the health benefits of breast milk are numerous. We don't have a long enough time to actually discuss them, but especially for any infant that's born premature.
So maybe tell us a little bit about why breast milk for a baby born premature, why it's necessary versus formula.
Mom's milk is obviously always the number one choice. Because these babies are born prematurely, these moms are undergoing a lot of stress and sometimes are unable to produce enough milk for the babies. Because of that, second best is donor human milk. One of the highest negative effects of being born prematurely is something called necrotizing enterocolitis. NEC is very dangerous for a baby and can actually be reduced by up to 80% with receiving donor human milk versus premature formula.
So that condition you mentioned, the breast milk is easier to digest?
Absolutely. It's much easier to digest. Any formula is actually based on cow's milk. And the easiest thing for a baby to digest, a human baby, would be human milk.
Now, I mentioned, tell us more about this depot opening at, I think it's August 30th. It's going to be in the greater Hartford area. The first one that's actually located at a hospital?
In Connecticut, this is the first hospital-based milk depot. The other 4 that are in the state of Connecticut are actually one is in Danbury and the other ones are in the southern part of the state. So this will actually reach a large portion of this the greater Hartford area and enable moms to be able to bring their milk here so that we can ship it out to the milk bank in Massachusetts for pasteurization and processing.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know some of our listeners may be listening and wondering, is it safe to be sharing breast milk if it's not between the biological mother and a baby? So walk us through that. That's first the screening process and then how it's made safe.
Correct. It is obviously a fluid from a human, so it does. We have to go through certain testing to ensure the safety and efficacy for the babies. Moms are first screened with a phone call. Medical questionnaires are filled out. Actually, they need to get the okay from not only mom's physician to donate the milk, but also the pediatrician so that mom can prove that she has indeed extra milk for donation. Once that's complete, mom goes for a blood test so that she's screened for certain communicable diseases. And then she is cleared to donate her milk. And then once the milk is gotten to the bank, it actually goes through additional testing and pasteurization to ensure that there's no bacteria in the milk.
Marissa Merlo is on the phone with me, lactation consultant for Yukon Health's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, as we talk about the fifth human milk depot to open in the state of Connecticut, I believe, next week. Joining us also on the phone now is Jan Ferraro, Director of Education at Celeron. And Jan, you helped open up, I think, one of the first milk depots in the state along the southern part of the state. Can you tell us more?
Good morning. Yes, it was actually a terrific thing for us in February of 2016. Since Celeron is the largest breast pump provider here in Connecticut, our business model was a little different. We just didn't give the mom the pump and say, good luck to you. We actually offered mom ongoing support after she had her baby. When a lot of her questions come up about pumping and breastfeeding, through those conversations, because it isn't such a long relationship we have with these moms, it started to come up that these moms had an excess of milk, and they really just wanted a place to donate it. And we were very lucky to have a good relationship with Mother's Milk Bank Northeast, and we put a depot right here in our Guilford office. And so far, since February of 2016, this Guilford office alone has gotten over 14,000 ounces of donated breast milk.
That's a lot of ounces. And when you have looked at the number of people that are willing to donate, I'm curious if any of this milk would go to, a mother that has a full-term baby, or is it just for premature babies?
So the bulk of the milk is for our premature population because, as Melissa stated, their little digestive systems can simply do much better when they're given human milk. They always say human milk for human babies. Of course, we have, instances, and the Mother's Milk Bank Northeast certainly gets requests for babies that are full-term who may be compromised or who moms maybe can't produce breast milk, or maybe it's an adoption scenario. And Mother's Milk Bank Northeast does a very good job of providing for those moms when they can. It's a little bit different than our premature population, but certainly they do what they can when they can.
And Marissa, the same thing with the milk depot about to open next week, just for premature babies?
Actually, it's very similar to what Jan has said. It's distributed from the milk bank in the Northeast in Boston. So it is available for NICUs across the Northeast, and addition private moms who just want to give their babies a little bit of extra human milk.
So if we have some listeners who are interested in donating their milk, maybe they don't need it or anymore, in terms of how they want to go about dropping it off. Can you walk us through the process again?
Absolutely. If they have extra milk, I'd love to take it from them. They can reach out to me directly, and they can actually just contact the Milk Bank Northeast in Massachusetts, and they'll go through the initial screening process. Once moms have received permission and have completed the screening process, they get their ticket number, and then we can arrange a delivery time for me to accept their milk.
Jan Ferraro, for you as well, for mothers along the shore, if they want to donate, how do they go about doing that?
Yes, so actually Marissa brings up an excellent point. The best place probably to start is the Mother's Milk Bank Northeast, to go on their website. Or they can call the number will be on the website. They can call directly and start the process of becoming a registered donor. It's actually a quick process, usually done in a pretty short amount of time. Once they become a registered donor, same thing. They just give me a call, they email me, and we just set up time for them to come drop off their milk. And here we usually get it shipped out typically the same day that they drop it off. So the processing of the milk at the milk bank starts pretty quickly.
Marissa, you mentioned your nursing background earlier. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about why breast milk is more desirable for babies. I understand the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that if they can, babies be exclusively breastfed for a minimum of 6 months. Tell us more about what a baby is getting from this milk that helps them grow and their immune system as well.
Yes, that's actually the most important because babies will thrive on formula as well. But the long-lasting, lifelong immunological benefits that are in breast milk is something that you will not get from formula. We consider mom's colostrum, which is that early breast milk, baby's first vaccine. It's lifelong benefits that are going to carry with them. What many moms aren't aware of, actually, though, is by providing breast milk and by breastfeeding, mom actually gets lifelong benefits as well. Her risks of developing breast and ovarian cancer are drastically reduced the longer that mom provides breast milk.
Are there misperceptions about breastfeeding? I'm just curious what both of your takes are on that. We know recently President Trump was in the news with, this resolution at the United Nations Health Assembly being defeated to support breastfeeding, and President Trump tweeting that the U.S. strongly supports breastfeeding, but we don't believe women should be denied access to formula. Many women need this option because of malnutrition and poverty. I was wondering if you could both weigh in on the misperceptions.
Unfortunately, that statement really just shows Donald Trump's ignorance regarding breastfeeding. Yes, of course, access to formula should be permitted, but in areas with malnutrition and poverty, breast milk is actually the best source of nutrition for an infant. If we run the risk of them making formula with contaminated water, these infants can be very, very ill. And what better nutrition for them except breast milk? And it's readily available and free.
Jan?
And also, I think one of the misconceptions that moms think that they're not going to be able to make enough breast milk for their baby. And Marissa, I'm sure you will agree that moms make plenty of breast milk for their babies. The body knows how much to make, and the best way to make breast milk is continuing to get that baby to breast so that, your body says, hey, let's make some more breast milk for this baby.
Mm-hmm.
And Jan, because, again, you're Director of Education at Aceleron, for working mothers out there, that's where the breast pump is also important.
It is incredible. The Affordable Care Act provides that all moms who are breastfeeding should have a breast pump covered by their insurance. There are many. We carry here at Aceleron all the leading, brands that moms like, and all pumps actually are not alike. So what we're trying to do is you try to help mom find the pump that's going to work best for her and her needs. So I think a lot of moms are maybe unaware that breast pumps are covered by their insurance. I still see them on baby registries when we're planning showers. So it's a little learning curve to say, you know what, you don't have to put this on your registry. This is going to be covered by your insurance. And then coming to a company like Aceleron where we can help mom pick out the pump that's going to work best for her for when she needs it. We always feel that we'd love to have the baby at breast most often and have the pump as a backup for when she needs it.
Jan Farrar, again, Director of Education at Aceleron. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Marissa Merlot, lactation consultant for Yukon Health's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So, Marissa, starting August 30th, you'll begin accepting donations?
Absolutely. We're actually having a ribbon-cutting ceremony on August 30th at 2 p.m., and I welcome any and all pre-registered donors to come on down and offer us their milk.
And tell us again the location.
The location is at John Dempsey Hospital at Yukon Health, 263 Farmington Avenue in Farmington, Connecticut.
Marissa, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Today's show produced by senior producer Lydia Brown, and special thanks to Carmen Baskoff. Our technical producer is Kyone Wolf. Our digital producer is Carlos Mejia. And you can learn more about our show, WNPR.org/where we live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.